and we'll shortly also introduce Jonathan, who's with us during this session. But we decided this month to go a bit towards insider threats, towards what happens when we have these insider threats. SAP environments, as everyone knows, yes, they do sometimes are not exposed. Yes, we have this ongoing with different customers, whether it is, a priority even to look into security from that perspective. But what does it mean when it comes to Dave? So our persona today is going to be Dave. Unfortunately, Dave is our target man in this session, and we're going to revolve everything around him. So without further ado, let me introduce to you a little bit around Dave. So Dave is not your regular hacker. He's definitely, not malicious as you guys think he is. He's just part of your organization. He's part of this broader SAP system that you guys developed, that you guys have. So whether he has access to certain areas of custom reports where authorizations are not properly checked when it comes to that, where he has roles that has been there assigned to him, and all of the different areas that Dave has worked on, and this accumulation of roles has been attached to Dave. So Dave, does he actually mean harm? We'll have a look at this. We'll look into these different insiders. We have definitely two different purviews of insider threats, whether it is, your complex insiders going back to espionage and so on and so forth, but also to different aspects like simple, let's say, mistakes that happen. So Dave, at the moment, is what we're going to concentrate on. But before I do, I think it is also good that I introduce my guest today, Jonathan. Maybe a few words from your side.
Yes. Well, thank you for the great introduction. My name is Jonathan Stross. I'm lead researcher at Pathlock, and teaming up with NoMonkey to bring the knowledge, or to help the community to get a better insight on SAP security in general.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jonathan. And for who watches this later, or for who's in the session, I'm Wasim, leading the advisory team at NoMonkey Advisory, also doing the tackling SAP security together on a monthly basis with the different topics. So next month, we'll definitely have also an exciting topic. But just a few stuff around housekeeping. If you haven't been here before, tackling SAP security together is recorded, and then we publish it to who registered, or at least we publish it to YouTube, to LinkedIn. Please do, at the end of the session, discuss any kind of questions that you have. You can unmute yourself. We're a smaller group this time, and definitely sign up if you haven't. But I think whoever registered and is joined us has already signed up. But for any kind of news updates around tackling SAP security together and what we are doing around this space, you can sign up directly there. To move forward a little bit and maybe discuss a few areas, and I think most people have this idea of let's say analysis towards what are insider threats. I mean, we hear about it a lot. We see it in the news, and most of the breaches that we have seen, even during investigations, during incident response activities, are really around insider breaches. So insider threats, insider malicious or non-malicious mistakes that has happened, which led to certain areas. We will put it into context as examples around SAP. Jonathan is going to give us some of his insights when he goes into those different engagements, and we're going to see what makes it really dangerous to have these kinds of stuff, and then hopefully lead to where we can start by doing some areas that protect, let's say to some extent, insider threats, at least in terms of detection. The early detection, the better when it comes to these threats. So Jonathan has shared with me this. I actually haven't seen it before, but Jonathan, would you like to give us some insights on this fish tank
Definitely.
that actually helped hack a casino?
Yeah, so as an insider threat as such is not enough. there are in the IT landscape, of course, it's getting more and more complex. Having visibility onto each and every area, every potential vector of entering a system, might be inside, might be outside. Technical complexity is being added, and a technical complexity based on a human error can be also Internet of Things. In this very example, actually, there in a rather big casino chain, an Internet of Things device, actually a smart fish tank thermometer, was placed into an fish tank, was not properly secured, and actually this kind of error led to the exploitation of the. So it took quite a while. They went from the IoT device to the network to scavenging around the network, getting information, performing reconnaissance, ultimately then gathering financial data and releasing it onto the internet. So such kind of a small thing, which is really where you wouldn't think about, like just having a small sensor introduced to your IT landscape can lead to a very, very bad situation long term.
Amazing. I mean, this is insane. We see often that people do miss IoT stuff when even for small stuff. But when I saw this, I started reading it. It was something that's quite interesting to have a look at. Definitely here, we're not talking about particular SAP systems, but the example itself shows what kind of mistakes can happen. I mean, this is if you take it and expand on this example a little bit, I mean, this is part of a supply chain attack where an IoT device that was bought from somebody who probably never checked security areas around it, put it into this fish tank, and those attackers who somehow found it within the network and exploited it. Wow, interesting story. To move forward with these complexities and insider threats, I think we're not going to dig deep into the different espionage and sabotage. This is something that these are quite complex insider threats. I think a lot of industries, sure, they are targeted with these different areas, especially the first two parts and then state-sponsored attack. Definitely we see some industries really targeted, but we want to go down a little bit and discuss from a different perspective, other than these complex insider threats, what is other common insider threats, and maybe we meet the everyday daily. So Jonathan, give us some insights into some more common insider threats rather than going into the sabotage and espionage stuff that usually happens with certain industries that are really targeted by state attackers or stuff like this.
Of course, yeah. So the everyday Dave. Even the old Romans know that's it's at least here in Germany, in the area where I live, a very, very famous saying, "Errare humanum est." To error is human, and this actually, of course, was 2,000 years ago. The Romans already knew that people will do mistakes. It's part of making us human. But then it was probably dropping a scroll with supply chain information. Where are the good wine grapes stored, or the gold bars or something like that. But nowadays, it starts really, really simple. Going into the SAP system, sending payroll data or in general data over insecure medium. There's still a common misunderstanding that email SMTP is an encrypted, secure medium. There are a lot of fraudulent, or especially in small to mid-sized companies, one of the go-to frauds which happen are based on the invoicing. Sending an invoice via email, and some SMTP servers can be, or the email can be intercepted actually, and the corresponding banking address can be changed and swapped, and the person who wants to purchase the machine, the whatever, is then wiring the payment to a fraudulent account instead of the actual account. But also more towards SAP, or more commonly in SAP, when we talk about roles and authorization, running debug in production, for example, it's more a structural kind of issue also, because you should never have, of course, debug authorization in production. There are some cases where might with firefighting access this should happen, but yeah, sadly we still do see on a time not on a daily basis, but from time to time that there are very high privileges, especially with debug authorizations within productive instances. So theoretically, the whole yeah, consistency of data can be, of course, with the debug access changed. And of
Would
course,
definitely.
yes.
I think definitely as we move to the presentation, we want to have some examples. We will provide some examples that really how does it affect certain business processes. Sorry to interrupt you, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Yes. So, and at the end, of course, enabling macros in general in documents. There are very creative ways around. We actually had a project quite recently, which was also then a little bit of awareness training, because it did actually already something did already actually happen, and then due to that, a need was arise for a security tool. We got approached, and as part of the security tool introduction, we did an awareness training. And the issue in general is, I would say, not even per se error in terms of by not watching out. Of course, watching out, you can also not watching out, you can also be but sometimes, especially in the IT, the context is not really clear. So when I introduced the phishing scenario and said, okay, this is how phishing works, the question was, okay, but am I still affected? I only clicked like 1 second on there. And yeah, well, in some certain cases, clicking 1 second on a malicious link, stealing cross-site scripting style information, that's already enough. So it's really also about awareness. And I would say if the human would know better, definitely those errors of the human Dave, because they learn from mistakes, of course, will not happen as much.
I think when it comes to even SAP, like what can go wrong, this is what I believe, and I see it a lot also with our customers, that what can go wrong is the missing piece here. Like, sure, there is these systems, sure, a lot of people have SAP all or a debug authorization, but what can they actually do? And I think this is an important part of the awareness, but putting it in a technical perspective, but more of relating it what can actually go wrong in a certain business process.
100%. So yeah. Sadly, we add here, or the last thing from my side, we actually started kind of a request or an case study actually, which is soon to be released, where we are actually talking also about this what if question when we have the meantime to react versus the meantime to respond. If it's clear for the SAP department or the SAP system owner, how long can your company actually also survive if this system is really being down? Yeah. And currently the answers are anywhere between a week max until a few days, depending on which business process is being digitalized with the SAP system. Quite dangerous.
I think there was a use case last year for a group. I think it was the Stolly Group USA that actually got hit with a ransomware, and part of it, there are other parts also involved, was that they declared bankruptcy.
Yes,
and they run heavily on SAP systems. So we can see what kind of consequences behind that. But you were talking about these common threats, the mistakes that happen, and here we see a few of them that you were discussing. To summarize it, whether it is around debugging, whether it is these, we do when we are doing our pen tests. Most of our findings, I would say, forget about the basis findings. Z programs, at least custom programs, are quite dangerous. And I don't want to name and shame and put in some other, let's say, auditors out there with their extractors that they come in. It is quite intense what you can do with those extractors as an attacker. Sure, you need the knowledge of, at least you need to get into that system in the beginning, but at least we can understand how, at least from the perspective of that threat, getting into an SAP system from a user perspective is not quite hard. Privilege escalation with custom programs also becomes quite easy if you understand how to operate them. So some of these mistakes and what resulted in those mistakes definitely can cause a lot of issues. So going directly to these real-world specific cases, Jonathan, we discussed areas. We have put some or gathered some examples together on specific business processes. Maybe you want to walk us through some of these business processes.
100%. I also want to take a step back quite quickly.
All right.
I want to showcase something here. This year, I know why Wasim is already laughing, because also in SAP, we always focus kind of when we do security on actually server side, but never client side, or to a limited extent client side, because this is typically handled by the overall IT. And especially with so to get in the Silverbacks, we actually just a few minutes ago released a white paper how actually endpoints, so laptops can be actually, with the help of an USB stick like this, which is actually not a USB stick, it's a so-called USB rubber ducky. It's a human. It mimics a keyboard and inserts keyboard strokes. Runs a PowerShell script to exfiltrate actually certain history data, SAP GUI landscape XML to get already around the SAP router, if SAP router string is maintained in SAP GUI logon, to actually get already a hold on, or at least in the closer reach of an SAP system, even without VPN access. So it really starts in the holisticness. There are a lot of things that used to be the most common gifted tool, I think, like 5-6 years ago, or most gifted good on trade shows. So quite ridiculous. So yeah, quite interesting. So tying it back to the actual business process running in the SAP system, finance. Really important process. We have been in call to projects where, for whatever reason, they did catch some emails, to a Gmail address, and said, okay, well, somehow financial data at the end of year closing, there was actually a batch job which was triggered once a year, right before end of year closing, and they exfiltrated via email the data. Gathered the data over months. Well, the SAP system already did, and they forwarded just this financial information for doing insider trades. That exploded like tremendously. That was really bad. But yeah, that was custom ABAP hidden in a actual feature being used in productive system, and it was just like a hidden routine running and exfiltrating this data. Especially when we see such kind of custom developments or third-party code, for example. Typically in those insider threat scenarios, there are different motivations, of course. Either the personnel is leaving, is not satisfied with the current, or, as mentioned, just human error. But that's also something we're going to talk about a little bit in just a second.
Absolutely.
Logistics, also very important topic, because there also from the security principles, we're talking not only, depending on what kind of logistics we're talking about, not only about the CIANA principles, confidentiality, integrity, security, but also actually safety. So there can be instances, of course, where you can, on the one hand side, of course, have vendor pricing, so it's classical supply chain things going on, but also if you in the logistics program, for example, the production line for distributing packets, for example, in a certain way, you could actually also get people hurt right away. But that's a different topic, probably for an own session. So what we see here is that accidentally, or that was also quite recently, accidentally vendor pricing through an old reporting transaction was being leaked. And the issue was that there was just outdated controls. So they didn't streamline the requirements, the increase of requirements really with the overall SAP application, and re-evaluated, are our controls which we have also effective enough? Do we need to expand? And that actually then had also quite the big impact. Last but not least, HR. To summarize the holy triangle of SAP, is of course also very critical thing, because we are talking here about not only payroll data, but also personal identifiable information, social security numbers, identity fraud, for example, big topic. credit card information for the logistic parts. Correspondingly, for the HR, you have bank accounts, you have address, you have religion, for example, maintained in HR. So therefore, dumping this particular sensitive data is actually quite well, we have seen this quite a couple of times, and the question is always, where is this data then at the end also going? Where it's being
Yeah.
sold, where it's being used, what is it being used?
I think there's a lot of also regulatory fines here that are coming in
100%.
different parts of the world, and if you don't have certain elements to remove certain data, I'm talking now about mainly like GDPR. You can get sued from that perspective. You can get sued for the perspective that this data was leaked from a regulatory. So there's a lot of areas here. And to further maybe set the scene here, Jonathan, I know setting the scene for insider threats sometimes is nonchalant. It's easy, or not easy, but it's known and very well used. But I think it's very important that the awareness is there before jumping into how can we actually detect and how can we actually improve security around that. So maybe we look into the different insider threats. What do they actually look like from a Dave perspective? So the many faces of insider threats, or the many faces of Dave, to keep on theme here. First of all, and happy to hear your examples around them. We have negligent Dave, which is one who really didn't know the proper procedures. This is where awareness just falls, where the SOPs or standard of operating procedures are not quite clear, processes are not quite clear, and is it an accidental insider? What is your gut feeling here?
So, well, with negligent Dave, we see this quite common. That is actually, I would say, one of the, but we will see that also, talk a little bit later about that, about statistics. The issue here really is, as you already mentioned, that certain liability is not clear. Who owns risk? Because only if we know who owns risk, they will actually be held accountable. And as soon as someone is being held accountable, he will do his utmost best to actually safeguard his duty, so to do care, in order to not let such kind of things happen. As mentioned, we had this training, and the question was, yeah, and I just shortly clicked on it. It wasn't time. I didn't spend too much time on the website. Yeah, well, it did already happen at this point in time. We saw actually in Facebook pictures of the office place where someone was actually thanking their spouse because they got for Valentine's Day delivered to their office a chocolate, and but what they didn't see is a sticky note on the screen with a password and an IP address. So that such kind of things, I wouldn't say that is potentially a bad person trying to, or to intentionally act bad. It was just by coincidence being negligent and not aware about what can happen, and therefore, yeah.
I do agree with you in that perspective, but I do have to also sometimes here tackle also administrators in that perspective. I hope.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, when you are enabling people to reuse these credentials, when you are enabling them to look into exactly, so it's not just I don't want to just blame Dave at this moment. I want to blame more of the process. So another area here, I think this is one that we try to always identify, try to find based off user behavior, is the malicious Dave or the malicious insider, right? So he knows what he's doing. They're quite technically savvy. They exactly know how to operate. They've been there probably for a long time in the company. This is where it goes either very good for that person being there for a very long time, or it goes south, where something happens, retrenching, so on and so forth. And this is something that we actually now see a lot with our different customers, where these people who have had access to different, what I call privilege creeping, have had access to all of these different systems, are now causing the major incidents in that perspective.
Couldn't agree more. It's, I would also say, by far, probably the most dangerous one. Because the issue is, if they really know what they're doing, They know the controls which are currently in place, trying to ship around controls by flipping certain settings in the system just time-wise, because they know when audit happens, when internal audit is around. They do safeguard in so we have seen exploits around where actually very good features of the SAP system are used to the bad. Just a few examples that those are like the 101s which are have been around for quite a while, but we still see it happening.
Mhm.
Is, for example, callback security. When systems share distributed systems connect to one another, SAP systems, and they want to execute a routine so system A wants to execute a routine on system B and wants to have information back, or just some procedures calling from that remote system upon completion back actually to another system also. That's actually quite a good thing, or used to be a good thing, due to realizing or digitalizing the connectivity to retrieve this information to start the procedures. Nevertheless, what SAP didn't really think of, or well, did think then afterwards about, is that the consistency of SAP systems. You can actually do when you call a second system via SM59 do a ping test. Actually, on the remote system, the function module RFC ping is being executed. It's empty per default, but there are ways to alter that, and then you can call actually with the destination back. So performing a call back, BAPI user create and profile assign, and that's how easy you can spin up in a Docker container an A4H system, altering this function module, telling your local admin, hey, I cannot reach the system, can you ping to check connection? And then, yeah, already
Absolutely.
happening.
I
So
mean, this is what trust blindly with how
yes,
SAP trust my SAP system. That's the problem here when it
and
comes. But
they know.
you know, our final day before we start looking into detection and looking into how we can safeguard specifically around SAP is definitely an external posing as an insider. So
Mhm.
definitely it wasn't that person who was inside, but the external threat, or was able to use a different login due to whatever reason, that technical reason that existed that enabled them. So this is also another aspect. I think this one is quite also difficult. We did try to look into it from different use cases in SAP, and if you are jumping from the web dispatcher going to the message, it is quite starts to become difficult of who you are as an identity, what sessions where there are, how many sessions you have. It starts to stop in that perspective.
Yeah, it's a very complex topic. The craziest scenario we actually helped to remove the shades and get the system back up running was actually a case where a Z report was being used on a public facing SAP system, a web page
Mm-hmm.
for a certain business process. It was actually by a government. And yeah, that was actually a custom login page where you, as a business owner, could get some certain things done. But it was a Z report. You can find, you could have. So we found the attacker found it via some scanning and search engines looking
Mm-hmm.
specifically for Z reports. And as part of the development, it was the policy that in the HTMLs and in the actual application, as a comment, the developer needs to paste their username.
Yeah,
And what then actually happened is, yeah, someone just looked at the HTML data, got the username, and then actually just iterated passwords once a while until one was matching. That is,
absolutely.
yeah, because if you do then a little bit of spear phishing, for example, if the username is somehow related to the real name, you can find out birth dates, birthday of spouse, and yeah, classical case. There are a lot of people using this kind of personal information, which you can really easily retrieve to then grant external people access, so validly authenticating then access to the system. And this works via a lot of different area, different vectors to actually
Yeah,
get hold of the
and
system.
And I do really like with the logging. We were together, myself and Jonathan, this week at Troopers, also presenting these problems with logging when it comes to SAP. Like you can't sometimes really look into who did what in certain situations. But I think it's enough to shame and blame, Dave, but maybe now look into solutions that we can actually look into it. I know that you prepared a short demo, at least on how these challenges start to happen. And then we can dive deep into, what can we do in terms of detection? Maybe a few things that the audience can also take with them at the end of this session, where they can really implement it, try to look into it from that perspective, no matter what they are using internally into their organization. So walk us through this demo that you have done for us.
Of course. So a little bit upfront. So the SAP system as such is of course a very specific system, but it is an IT system. It does have web communication, so it's still also vulnerable to, for example, phishing attacks, as same as classical websites. And important here to understand is, on the one hand side, we will see that here in the demo. You can see here an email being sent from IT support at acme.com. That actually here the user needs to log in and revalidate their password. They have 3 days left. So they log in. Of course, now pros would see here the IP address. Of course, we hosted it locally here in our on our dev box, but looks like a valid SAP system. Rerouting then actually to the actual SAP system, saying something about cookies. Now we're logging in, and actually the damage has already been dealt. The credentials of the SAP system are already gone. Now an attacker would just iterate through the passwords. Actually, the way how they exfiltrate it is via email, because SMTP typically, so if you just run a webhook, for example, well, chances are quite high it's being stopped with a firewall or endpoint protection. But as we can see here, attached exfiltrated password, username Bobby, password start 123. Well, quite not so strong password. And we see now this particular user, Dave Obby, logging in into the SAP system. We see it as red because we are logging in here as the with the stolen credentials, actually, as the attacker. Get a hold of the system. But what we see now, of course, we want to, as an attacker, directly get to the ground jewels or do some reconnaissance. Going here to the business partners, retrieving information on the business partners, and we do see that we don't see anything. And this is an important thing, and that's actually one of the key points we want to highlight here. On the one hand side, human error, as mentioned, will happen. That is not a question if, it's a question when. And the question is, how do you actually manage this kind of risk actually, or how do you actually then compensate something like this happening? And there are different ways, different controls you can introduce. You can, of course, proactively define processes, so on and so forth. But you can also, of course, safeguard with tools from SAP, from other vendors, or also kind of homegrown if capacity is there. Safeguarding this kind of information. From here, we actually can directly hop into the next slide, because yeah, here we're just checking the table browser, the corresponding table where also all the data elements are masked, so the attacker doesn't even get to the state. He does have a valid authentication session running, but based on the terminal ID, the control placed here in this very system identifies this terminal is not known, so we will limit the amount of data being seen, and a workflow behind is being started to really validate that's an actual that it is really Dave accessing the system. As we can see here, logging in with the right terminal ID, we can clearly see still the data, and we do not disrupt here then, of course, the business workflow. And at the end, that's a very, very important point. We need to find the fine-grained borderline between being too paranoid, placing too many restrictive controls in terms of limiting then actually the speeding up by digitalizing a business process, but on the other hand side, make it as safe as possible, And also the safety measures need to be accepted by the people. Otherwise, they will try to find a way around because it's just getting annoying.
Absolutely. I mean, to summarize it also, these are some of the areas that we actually have a look into when it comes to these challenges. A lot of blind spots happen between, the different transactions or the levels, the details that are going on. Definitely, when we are talking about segregation of duty, it is in SAP, when I came into this Japanese world, I always going to repeat this, is that I've heard SAP security so many times. When I dig deeper into it, they all related to authorization, segregation of duty, identity access management. So definitely it's not the all in all. It is a big part of SAP, 100%, but there are different attack vectors when it comes to that. These are some of the different areas that we wanted to have a look at, but maybe we jump directly into how can we protect against a Dave or against an insider threat. Maybe at the end of the day, there's nothing 100% when it comes to protection. There is how can we detect fast? How can we put measures to stop things from happening? How can we slow down? How can we put these barriers to slow down a Dave or to slow down an insider threat? Maybe walk us through those different elements that we have discussed previously, me and you, throughout all of these sessions that we did together, around a structured approach in that perspective.
Right. Well, that important keyword, structured approach. We do see a few trends which are really, really good in the SAP world. So especially when we talk about ZIEM versus SAP logs, that more and more companies are integrating their overall logs into ZIEM. They need to translate then, of course, the Japanese language to a more technical focused audience, which knows a lot about bits and bytes, packet inspection on firewall level, but not so much about what is a boot 0BK table or UST 04 table, for example, or AGR users, you name it. So on the one hand side, you need to bridge the gap between knowledge awareness and translating this information, integrating your security strategy holistically into your overall IT security strategy. Because typically, not the basis admin will be sitting Friday late night in the office, waiting just for that email or alert that something happens in the system to block a batch process or kick out people from the system. That's typically not the case. So of course there are some onboard tools which have been there, which are very, very valid. But also here I do agree it's sometimes kind of a pity. Roles and authorizations 100% is the first thing, or one of the first things which should be definitely straight. But SAP security doesn't stop with roles and authorizations. If I have an unpatched vulnerability in my database, which I can use to release purchase order or to insert purchase orders in the table of purchase orders, I don't even need to go to the application layer of SAP system, SAP GUI, and creating that. I can directly do not even touch kind of the SAP system here. On top of that, the role and role-based access control is a little bit outdated, especially if I wouldn't say outdated, that's a little bit more too over the top, but there are certain concepts which are not being covered by role-based access control, like phishing. Role-based access control relies on the information. Is this person authenticated, yes or no? So it has an authentication. Does he have the authentication and then the authorization? But the issue is if you're authenticated and have the authorization, and a phishing attack, you are then, of course, as an attacker, authenticated, and you do have then the authorization for certain areas. There you need to introduce another, like an aspect of granting access, and that's an attribute-based access control, where you can say, okay, well, outside of usual office hours, IP address, geolocation. So maybe I was on a business trip, returned now from a business trip, and now 2 weeks after from that same hotel, someone is logging in. Well, use the weak encrypted hotel Wi-Fi. Very, very common what we see. On the other hand side, we need to talk then about also vulnerability detection and management. We need to identify out of the box weaknesses, which are tied to systems being more open for connectivity, so valid reasons maybe, but maybe also, for example, patching, 0 days, so on and so forth. If they remain open after Patch Tuesday, typically we see it in our honeypots, follows Madness Wednesday. where everyone is then testing out, okay, well, what is this S node really about, and testing out boundaries. And not only the good people, sadly, also, of course, the bad people. And here we need to detect those vulnerabilities, unsecure configurations, for example, custom code, for example, and introduce some kind of controls to do that. And on top, we need to evaluate then, of course, if our measures actually, which we do, are effective. Is still someone not obeying the rules, trying our way around? Is there still some critical patterns we can identify from the logs actually, which would say, yeah, someone disregarded the joiner mover leaver process by utilizing whatever, to alert and then to react, because time
Yeah.
is money.
And I think to even put it into more context with the new I wouldn't say new technology of SAP, like talking about BTP or talking about the public or private offerings that arise. For instance, now it's not called Rise anymore; it's called something else. I even forgot what it is. SAP ERP Cloud Private, whatever that SAP calls. So also here, when it comes to detection and at least detection logging, it becomes quite difficult. I think there was an ongoing discussion with SAP on what to, let's say, provide in terms of logs, what to provide in terms. I know the headache, I would say, for some of our customers when it comes to that, and unfortunately, this is a closed system, and this is where we cannot extract anything more than what they are allowing us. So yes, there are challenges when it comes to these detection, but I think the part of building up the configuration or these layers, this is what enables us to at least have some sort of patience until we get to that logging mechanism.
100%.
Moving forward, some of the stuff that you guys are also doing and implementing, whether it is around protection, walk us through a little bit how that works with the vulnerabilities, with the detection, a little bit in that perspective.
Of course. So yes, especially when we talk about insider threats, or well, let's call it extended insider threats, where also maybe a third party does have valid credentials logging into the system. The question is really, how do we, on those different aspects where SAP is providing us some guidance on, let's say, the SAP security baseline template, so on and so forth, how can we make sure that here, on the one hand side, what SAP is already recommending us is really being enforced, also in a let's say, economic way. So there's no way you will, when you start your SAP security journey, that by a flip of a switch, you will be directly safe. That's typically not the case. It's a project, it's an ongoing project, and it's a process, actually. It's a cyclical process because new features are being developed, introduced by SAP, new patches, just new things happen in the SAP, of course, where you need to have like a cyclical validation that your security project is going in towards the right direction. So that for the, let's say, 100% you can do, you're as close as possible at the 100%. And that you also then not only get clean, but that you also then stay clean, so that over time you are not introducing more risks than you are actually mitigating. So here we follow a cyclical approach where we cyclical, daily, monthly, yearly, whatsoever, depending on your controls area, audits area, and legal requirements, therefore, schedule cyclical assessment scans where you can define, this is my go-to, must-have, so the most critical issues which need to be, or most critical malconfigurations which need to be at all time not present in the system. Monitor them on a daily basis with a cyclical scanning. Based on that, do some alerting. Or on the other hand side, then say, okay, once a month I just want, or at the end of every sprint, I want to have an automatic code scan to see that our baseline is, or basic common, yes, is still up and safeguarded. So, but on the other hand side, this needs to be a little bit complementary, because every time when we talk about a cyclical scan, about an ad hoc scan, for example, it's a snapshot of a given time. So in this very moment at 16:49, at 4:49 p.m. European time zone, if I now start a scan, it might be that a second later, this very profile parameter, which was being set, gateway ACL mode, for example, has now been switched back by the attacker. And here you need to introduce, to complement this, real-time threat detection. and or in general threat detection. And here, of course, as you already mentioned, the key challenge is there are over 70, actually over 100 different, depending on what you define a log source or a data source for processes in an SAP system, are a lot of data sources where you can get this valuable information, but you can also easily be overloaded. So we typically see that an SAP system is producing way more than million lines of logs per SID on a daily basis. So you need to find there the needle in the haystack, especially when we talk about process and change management, and also about unexpected or unusual user behavior, for example. So typically what we see here is that it's not a process which is over and over not very good, that there is the exploitation actually happen. It's actually those single things, those critical events which just happen once or twice every quarter, for example, which are average the most dangerous ones. And here, introducing this kind of process, on the one hand side, having this layered approach, enforcing it on a cyclical basis to do a validation that the measurements are in place, and then validating in real time that those controls are not being messed with, is our holistic approach to securing SAP systems.
All right. I mean, this is quite important to summarize some of these areas. I think most of the stuff that we usually see during our pen test, we had this incident where we were doing the pen test, and during the pen test, there was the standard users. This is a simple form of misconfiguration. Standard users were completely locked; they were completely secure. So there goes that attack vector, right? We did, so we had a couple of days. The second day, the standard users were open, and we were like, okay, so did we miss it yesterday? But it was actually, it was during a change management process where the basis did not wait until the entire process finished or until the different approvals went through. So they did unlock the SAP star user, did their changes, forgot that it is there, and then got access to a firefighter user. So that was quite an interesting area where we saw it while we are doing a pen test. So most of this misuse, or at least patterns that can be, definitely just wrap it up here and give the chance for any questions. Definitely when it comes to debug access, those downloads of the different reports that are there, custom codes that are definitely necessary. And this is, I said in the beginning of our chat today, custom code is most of the time, most of the findings that we have, because when it comes to basis configuration, yes, you need to set it, you need to maintain that, and this is where it becomes tricky. But when it comes to custom code, this is where the interesting stuff starts to pop up, where you have flaws in your authorization, where you have flaws inside what can you actually access, OS or not. So these are the different areas that we also definitely recommend looking into when it comes to your environment, or at least into your insider threats. So from here, Jonathan, we have a few minutes from logs to insights when it comes to these different areas. It is definitely important, as you said, with the anomalies, with what to understand from the different logs of the SAP system. But we always take it from what I always recommend our customers also, to make sure that they do define certain use cases, because you said it, 100%. You said that logs are insane. Like the amount of logs, if you turn them on, and no matter how many logs you can find in an SAP system, if you turn them on, you have a lot of bad user practice. So what do you want to weed out is based off of these use cases, right? You wanted to say?
Yeah, 100%. There's a thing I call or the Pareto principle. Investing 20% time, 80% of results. It's kind of a, yeah, you could say to a certain extent also applies here. So SAP per baseline template recommends to enable security audit log full scope, all clients, all users. There are, of course, a lot of logs then being created. But if SAP, the vendor, already says, okay, well, it needs to be there, that's really important part, important to listen on, actually, on the one hand side. And also to right up front, actually, to also take in those measurements into account and sizing the SAP system, because your typical 10%, if you have a quite large landscape, gathering all the data, you will exceed it 100%.
Oh, definitely.
That's but coming to the important point, when we talk about SIEM integration, it's important to bridge the gap. It is important to not only map your roles, behavior anomalies, analysis. That's like the next step of log ingestion in a SIEM. It's really having those playbooks, really making the SOC team understand. So it doesn't help you to have a tool and which forwards now logs to your SOC center. If the SOC center is sitting there and questioning now, okay, and now I do have an alert here, and what do I do? So you need to think there from start to end. And the most pragmatic approach is maybe you already know your personnel. Maybe you already know what has happened in history. Define a top 10 list. Say, okay, well, we'll start on integrating those top 10, this top 10 list. We're trying to test it, and we see then on the other end from the other department if we then get the response we're looking for. So
Typically.
start
And this is,
small, time at a time.
I would say start small. And this is for definitely for organizations who really want, it's just a start. You know, there are organizations who are mature in this area where now they're looking into even now starting threat hunting activities around those different use cases, especially use cases that are relating to business processes, whether it comes to fraud, whether it comes to, you know, different areas within a business process that you can tackle as an insider threat to that per se. So before we shut it off and maybe ask for some questions, what are, Jonathan, from your purview, some of the takeaways or some of the stuff that you can give away to the audience that they could take away and have a look at in that or start doing?
Of course. So the very first one, audit all, debug SE38, SA38, SE80, and quite obvious, 100%. Of course, you can use security audit log. Therefore, it's not only security audit log. There are a lot of the transaction log to review that. Maybe you also are able to have a working student ingesting or writing a small report, alerting via email, maybe on those if those are run in a system where they shouldn't be run, for example. Start to act on those and review those accesses where they are not needed anymore. QA production not needed by sides of a firefighting emergency with valid reason and reasoning approval process in place to have this kind of access. Then, of course, we need to review the data-heavy Z reports, the top 10 of those. Start to review them. Just crunch one at a time. Have a look on it. Check what they do. Are there any loopholes? Use onboard SAP tools, for example, SAP Code Inspector, the ATC. They already provide some out-of-the-box value for most common, you would say, scenarios, SQL injection, external email addresses. Actually, I think one of the checks which you can also use. Then of course review all roles which do have or profiles also which have an all or a star or something like that in their name or in the description, because of course that could be that it's granting very, very heavy access. Of course, monitoring the cross-module access anomalies. So here it's really about, okay, how can you interact with the SAP system? How's the SAP interacting with other applications? Can you really find there also then context about that? Because typically either SAP is the crown jewel which is being targeted to retrieve information, or SAP is being used as the loophole to get into the more inner of the IT. And then of course alert on downloads or logging in on unusual hours. There you can define thresholds, for example. You can use tools to do that, which then pinpoint such kind of low-hanging fruits on misuse cases, because no one should be logging in from Germany at midnight, for example. That's not even by law kind of dangerous, but
You never know. I mean, now with doing pen testing, which for me is quite mind-boggling, doing pen testing, and you have to get some approval from SAP if you're doing it on the public offering.
Yes.
They will give you actually a time frame which is after working hours. So
okay, of course, makes sense.
So it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I don't know why would they do that. Like after working hours, you have ways to do a pen test. But then if you have rules like these inside your detection, so this is quite. But anyway, this is something that we definitely have stuff to work around. But thank you, Jonathan, for joining me this month.